In 1812, Charles Dickens entered the world in Portsmouth, a busy naval town on England's southern coast. He was born into a family that looked respectable from the outside, but lived with money always close to the edge. His father held a government job, steady on paper, yet never truly secure. From the start, Dickens grew up with a quiet contradiction. Comfort existed, but it depended on luck. Not long after, the family moved to Chatham. For a child, it felt like a step up. There was more space, more routine, more reason to believe things would keep improving. Dickens absorbed everything around him and took the household stability for granted, because children usually did. But the adults' finances remained fragile. Bills still mattered. Debts still lingered. The safety he felt never matched the reality underneath. So his early years carried two lessons at once. On the surface, he experienced ordinary middle-class life. A working father, a home that held together, expectations that tomorrow would look like today. Underneath, the family relied on income that could falter and on choices that could backfire. Nothing dramatic needed to happen yet for pressure to build. The ground was already uneven. Stability was a thin layer, not a foundation. Then the fragile money situation finally snapped. Bills piled up faster than the family could pay, and there was no safety net. In that world, debt was not just embarrassment, it was punishment. His father was sent to a debtor's prison, and the family's life was rearranged overnight around shame and survival. For Charles, childhood ended without warning. One decision by creditors changed everything. With his father locked away, Charles was sent out to earn money. He went to Warren's blacking factory, a small business that produced boot polish, and he worked long hours doing simple, repetitive tasks. It sounded harmless. It was not. He felt abandoned, not only by circumstances, but by the adults who allowed it. Each day taught him the same lesson. Poverty did not just hurt, it erased you. The damage did not fade when the crisis eased. The work left a private wound he carried for the rest of his life, because it showed him how quickly respect turned into neglect. He watched how children could be used, how families could be broken, and how society looked away. It changed what he noticed and what he could never unsee. From that point on, poverty was not an idea to him. It was a memory. After the factory years ended, Dickens did not rise smoothly. He climbed. Schooling returned, but it had gaps, and he had to act older than he was. He learned fast because he had to. Soon he entered legal office work, first as a junior clerk and then training himself for shorthand. That skill mattered. It turned talk into text, and it opened a door he could actually push through. He became a court reporter, sitting through long cases and writing down what powerful men said as if every word counted. It was exhausting, but it trained his ear and hardened his focus. He watched law as a daily machine, not an ideal. At the same time, he wrote whenever he could, testing sentences, building speed, and learning what held attention. The work gave him discipline. The observations gave him material. Journalism was the turning point. Reporting let him speak in public without standing on a stage, and it made him feel visible in a way he had not before. He began publishing short pieces under a pen name, and readers responded to the sharp detail and energy in his voice. Each printed column was proof that he belonged in print. Confidence followed. So did ambition. Writing stopped being a secret hope and became a job. By the mid-1830s, Dickens no longer wrote in private. He wrote in public, week after week, as short comic reports and city scenes signed with the name Boz. Readers liked how quickly he caught people's habits and small hypocrisies, and newspapers liked how reliably he delivered. Those pieces were gathered into a book, Sketches by Boz. It sold, it spread, and it turned a working journalist into a noticed writer. That notice brought a bigger offer and a bigger risk. A publisher planned a monthly series tied to humorous sporting illustrations and needed a writer to supply the text. Dickens took the job, and he refused to treat it as filler. He built a rolling story around a club of travellers and their misadventures, designed to pull readers back each month. The project became The Pickwick Papers, and the schedule forced him to invent at speed. At first, the sales moved slowly. Then the episodes gained momentum, word of mouth climbed, and the country began to wait for the next installment. The book stopped being a publication and became a shared event. Dickens' name travelled far beyond London, and money followed it. With that success, he stepped out of the fragile life of short assignments and uncertain pay. He gained leverage with publishers, confidence with the public, and influence he had never held before. By the late 1830s, Dickens no longer wrote from the edge of obscurity. He wrote from the centre of public attention, and he used that attention like a lever. In his next major novel, he pushed readers toward the world of the poor, not as a distant problem, but as a daily system. Crime, hunger, and neglect stopped being background noise. They became the point. The fame that entertained Britain started to accuse it. In the story that became known through its orphaned child and its criminal underworld, Dickens showed how poverty fed on itself. Institutions failed first, and people paid the price later. The most shocking part was not that hardship existed, but that it was organised and accepted. Readers met suffering that was not romantic and not rare. The book travelled fast because it was dramatic. It hit harder because it felt true. Then he aimed at another target, the schools that claimed to prepare boys for life, but instead treated them as disposable. In the novel that followed, he exposed abusive boarding schools and the adults who profited from cruelty. Public anger rose and pressure followed. Dickens started to look less like a clever entertainer and more like a national conscience. Victorian society kept expanding and congratulating itself. He kept pointing to the human cost. In 1843, Charles Dickens looked successful to the public, but his money situation stayed tight. He supported a growing family, kept up an expensive household, and felt constant pressure to earn. At the same time, the country around him showed a harsher kind of progress. Factories expanded, cities packed in, and many workers lived close to hunger. Dickens grew angrier at that gap. He needed a book that paid quickly, and he wanted it to hit hard. He chose Christmas as his weapon because it carried a simple promise people already understood: kindness, warmth, and care for others. Dickens wrote fast and aimed straight at the conscience. He built a story that treated poverty as a moral emergency, not background noise. He linked private comfort to public responsibility, and he did it without sermons. The message moved through emotion, memory, and consequences. When the book went to print, he pushed for it to appear that same season. The gamble worked immediately. The book sold fast, and people talked about it as more than entertainment. Readers treated it like a reminder of what they owed to one another, especially in winter. It helped turn charity into a public expectation, not just a private choice, and it made Christmas feel like a time for social repair. Dickens had created a new kind of holiday story, one that mixed celebration with judgment, and once it landed, the season did not feel quite the same. The success of A Christmas Carol did not fade after one season. It pushed Dickens into a new lane. He produced more short Christmas books in quick succession, each built to deliver the same impact: a strong moral point, made emotional and aimed at a wide public. The pattern mattered. Christmas stopped being just a setting in his work and became a yearly stage for him, with readers waiting for the next message. Those follow-ups carried his name as a kind of guarantee. People bought them because they trusted the feeling he delivered. He leaned into that demand and wrote with performance in mind, shaping scenes that moved fast and landed hard. The books travelled beyond private reading. They were passed around workplaces and families, discussed as shared events. A story that began on the page now behaved like a public occasion, and Dickens noticed the power in that. Then Dickens brought the work into his own voice. He gave readings, not as casual extras, but as an extension of the writing itself. Audiences responded to more than the plot. They responded to him. His pacing, emphasis, and control of the room became part of what people paid for and remembered. The author turned into a performer, and the performer strengthened the author. From that point, Dickens's presence did not just promote the stories, it changed how they lived. By the early 1850s, his writing changed in a way the public could feel. He no longer relied on pure comic force to carry everything. He turned inward and built a long personal story in David Copperfield, shaped by memory, ambition, and the painful gaps between who a person was and who they tried to become. The success stayed, but the confidence looked harder won. That shift brought sharper questions. In David Copperfield, he tested how much of a life came from choice and how much came from pressure and luck. He pushed beyond easy villains and neat rescues. People harmed each other slowly through neglect, vanity, and fear. The old energy remained, but it carried doubt with it. He wrote as if growth cost something every time. Then Bleak House widened the target. The problem was not one cruel person, but whole systems that kept running while lives got ruined. He showed institutions that moved in circles, protected themselves, and drained hope through delay and confusion. The tone darkened because his patience thinned. He sounded like a man who saw how identity could be trapped by paperwork, reputation, and unanswered questions. By the late 1850s, Dickens's private life finally cracked under pressure. He separated from his wife, Catherine, after years of strain, and the split became a public event, not a quiet family decision. He tried to control the story in print, but gossip moved faster than any statement. Around him, his household reshaped. Then a new relationship took hold. Ellen Ternan, a much younger actress, first linked to his work, then to his life. With Ellen Ternan, Dickens built a partnership that stayed partly hidden, yet shaped his daily choices. He arranged money, housing, and distance because reputation mattered and scandal could damage everything he had built. But secrecy came with its own cost. Friends took sides. Trust thinned. At the same time, he drove himself harder than ever through editing, planning, and public performances, turning his readings into a major source of income and a test of stamina. The tours kept expanding, and Dickens kept saying yes. Night after night he performed, travelled, and pushed his body past warning signs because the crowds wanted him and he wanted to deliver. The work brought applause, but it also drained him. Exhaustion became routine. His health weakened while the schedule stayed brutal. In 1870, after years of strain, he collapsed and died, leaving behind not just famous books, but a final lesson about brilliance paid for in wear. After his death, the work kept moving without him. The novels stayed in print, and they travelled farther than any reading tour ever did. In schoolrooms, his stories became a shared language for learning what poverty looked like, how power behaved, and what a conscience cost. Generations met Victorian England through his sentences first. Over time, his name stopped meaning one author and started meaning a whole world. One book, above all, refused to sit quietly on a shelf. A Christmas Carol kept returning every December because it offered an easy promise with a hard edge. People could change and society could demand it. The story fit new stages and new screens, so it turned into plays, films, and television versions again and again. Each retelling adjusted details, but the engine stayed the same. Redemption kept selling. That modern fame carried a sharp contrast. As a boy, he had disappeared into factory work, one small worker among many, unseen and replaceable. In the present, he ended up impossible to ignore. His characters became cultural shorthand, and his Christmas story helped define what the season meant in public life: charity, warmth, and moral reckoning. The child who once felt erased became the voice people returned to every year.